That's interesting that you say that, Joe. Why is that? Do you think? Why don't we think of veterans and our sacrifice the other 363 days out of the year? How come it's only just those 2 days?
Well, I think because those holidays
Hmm.
are focused. Memorial Day is about those who served and sacrificed their lives.
Right.
But there's parades and you kind of remember veterans. I think part of the reason, particularly here for New York City, is we've lost a lot of veterans over going back to World War II. A lot of veterans. We used to have a very large veteran population here in the
Right.
city, and depending on who you talk to, we only now have somewhere between 160 to 190 to 200,000, and that's scattered all the five boroughs out of a city of 8.6 million people. So, we're not really thought of in that way.
And
Plus,
the problem with that is that we don't wear a sign. I mean, I have my hat on. I'm capping today, by the way, you guys. I have my, unless I wore my cap, you wouldn't know that I'm a veteran because
that's right.
we are just like any others. We are civilians. We
Right.
just happen to be super civilians because of what we did. And like I think one of the biggest issues is that we run away from our exception. Veterans are exceptional people to the
Right.
country, and we're not treated. We're not given that. We
No.
fight for that exception, and so instead of running away from it, which most of us do, as he said, we just finished saying there's about 200,000 veterans throughout the five boroughs. Significantly, that's a lot when you look at a small town like
Oh
New
yeah,
Rochelle or Mount
absolutely,
Vernon.
absolutely.
It's like a fraction of what that is, but it's trying to identify them and trying to get us to run to our exception.
Yeah.
So, like, what are some of your thoughts in terms of how do we run to our exception, and how should or how could the city help us
Yeah.
get to that exception?
Well, I think first and foremost is the transitioning out of military service to New York to the city is a huge issue. I mean, you're going through where you're living a structured lifestyle. You know when
Hmm.
you're going to eat. When you're
Right.
going to train. You know if you're going on a deployment, and then you come back to the city, and you're trying to take that uniform off, get reacclimated, probably to a community that has changed significantly since you were last there, and so it becomes a real big struggle. And a lot of veterans don't know what services they're entitled to. When you're getting out of service, you want to just get out and get back and get on into the life that you're thinking about getting into. And unless you're meeting somebody, like I said, like you has the cap on, or you're looking for services, it's a challenge. It's a big challenge. And so a lot of vets just tend to, particularly women vets and veterans who are LGBTQ, they take off that uniform and they are just trying to get on with their life. And
Right.
especially if they're like a single mother or something, it's
It,
difficult.
it's crazy because like I'm glad you touched on the women veteran, right? Because I'm actually getting ready to do a fundraiser. When we come offline and the show's over, we could talk further about it. But did you know, or are you aware that there are active service women who are looking for assistance for like formula for their kids and Pampers and
Correct.
how do we end up like that, Joe?
Correct. I mean, look, I think part of what has happened is the pandemic. I think the pandemic was a big. It exposed a lot of things,
Hmm.
and so you are now seeing women veterans, single mothers, looking for Pampers, formula. It's the same way. One of the biggest things that the conversations in the community has been food insecurity,
Right.
particularly for senior veterans. Veterans who are
Right.
already into their
Right.
70s or even 80s,
Hmm.
or even younger, even the 60s. There's this food insecurity now because the economy has gotten where the food has become so expensive, and so now you're seeing food pantries and places that are specifically trying to help veterans in that way. It really is. It's become a big challenge.
And we're utilizing them at an alarming rate. and
Yeah.
I just feel as if it's everything is going up right now,
Yep.
except for the average man's paycheck.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I think
Well,
I put
I mean,
up
even in the paychecks, they've gone up, but they just not meeting the cost of inflation.
of
as it
inflation,
keeps going.
right? So I mean, like when the dollar's inflated, can at some point can it deflate? Like, you know what I mean? Like,
Sure, sure. You know, the economy is it goes up, it goes down. But right now, we're in a place in space where, you know, the economy, as many people know, is not doing too well,
right,
and you know, this is where you start to see, turkey giveaways, and especially as we're rolling into Thanksgiving,
right,
and food, because a lot of families have to make that decision. Am I paying rent? Am I having, what can I do here? You know, you're literally having to make decisions about, can I afford to pay for a Metro card or to get on this train, to do this? And that's a big challenge. And then when you add veterans, it makes it bigger.
Speaking of the Metro cards, I mean, I think I screamed to the top of my lungs that veterans there's no reduction in Metro cards for being a veteran.
That's right.
And that's unsatisfactory. You know,
you have to be disabled.
That's unsatisfactory.
Yeah.
I mean, a little of something is better than a lot of nothing. And and it hurts because I'm one of the very few people that pay their fare every time on the bus, and and I'm like, everyone else is just like kind of walking on. And
I'm with you on that. I mean, one of the things that like we were fighting with City Hall in the prior administration was to at least fund Metro cards for student veterans,
right?
Because student veterans, they're bringing federal dollars into the city. They're utilizing CUNY and other campuses and colleges, but they're struggling because high rent, high food, high cost of living. So it was like, look, give them a Metro card, and we couldn't even get that done.
So what is City Hall saying about that? Why are they pushing back?
Well, I mean, City Hall's thing is, it's an MTA, which is a state. Correct. So their thing was, well, you have to get the MTA on board, and the MTA, of course, says, look, we don't have that money, and we're trying.
They're the only ones that cry. They're the only ones that cry broke with a surplus.
I sometimes think they're always going to.
Right, they're the only one. We don't have it, but they have a surplus.
And they recognize too that from the pandemic, and even today, we see it all the time. A lot of people, again, as we just talked about, will jump the turnstile. Will go through the gate.
Just walk through, or the bus. They just walk.
Walk in.
They just walk right. I'm the one of the very few people that always pay.
Same here.
Because I just feel as the second that I do it, the rules of engagement change.
I'm like you. I'd rather not have that problem and keep it going. I gotta get to go.
Me and you both. So
yeah. So I mean, look, there was a push, and it didn't happen. And so this is part of the problem. What happens in the city? Here. You get a lot of elected officials, rightly so, not taking it away from them. They will, have an event, or they will attend events, and they'll say all the right things. But then when we get to the policy structure of it,
right,
at City Hall, for 8 out of the 12 months, 9 out of the 12 months, you don't hear a thing. And then all of a sudden there's a couple of veteran bills or intros on the table.
See, I'm gonna tell you, I'm really, really, really not a big fan of new laws.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just not, because I think there are enough of the old laws that will protect us. The issue is it's not being enforced. Who's enforcing it? You write a million new laws. Who's going to enforce it?
Yeah, no. Look, I'll give you an example. So the city council a couple of weeks ago had a press conference with the speaker and members of the council about a roadmap for veterans for mental health. And, that's great, because there are veterans who do need assistance, who do have PTSD, who do have, they need those services. But it compounds the issue that not all veterans are broken. It almost looks like
I applaud you for that, what you just said.
It promotes that, we all come out of service and we're all broken. Yes, we've changed, but not of us are all broken. A lot of it, when you really dig into it, is transitional issues.
Yes.
I get to the point of it is, you look at these bills and some of them are worthy. Some of them have to do with data collecting. Like we're not getting good data from the city about how many veterans are utilizing services, utilizing the numbers, even the numbers that we're given, there's no context to the numbers.
Right.
So, anything around data is good. The problem is some parts of those bills for mental health require funding. And it's like, okay, excuse me, where are you getting that funding from? Because we just heard the mayor, and I'm sure everyone has seen it on the news or on radio, between the migrant crisis and the economy, he's talking about cutting into all the agencies' budgets.
He's already cut into...
We're looking at 15% cuts. So for a big agency like, let's say, the Department of Homeless Services or DSS, that cut amounts to somebody's program being cut.
Right.
But for a smaller agency like the Department of Veteran Services, which is low-hanging fruit, that cut cuts into the bone.
Right.
That cut is...
It's like you're severing an arm.
So what exactly would the agency be able to do? And I think there's where we start to get the disconnect, because the city will promote, yes, we have a department, we're the first agency in America, we've got all this stuff. But then when you go for those services, they're not necessarily there, or they've got to refer you out to a non-for-profit.
So then it becomes almost like an illusion.
Almost like a spinning wheel.
Right.
Yeah. So it just...
And that probably talks to why there's such a low disconnect between veterans and the services.
Well, I think, and not only does it lead to that, I think it leads to a distrust, because in the veterans community, and I'm sure like everywhere else, if you go for a disability claim with the city veterans agency,
right,
and they are like, all of a sudden you don't know where your paperwork is, what's going on, that leaves a bad impression upon you. Sure. And you're going to tell someone like me, who might be, I have to file a claim. Oh, no, don't go there. Go somewhere else. And so it leads to a bad reputation and much more difficult to get anything done.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So let me ask you, when we have city dollars for veteran services, essentially it comes from the feds. It's a trickle-down effect, correct?
Well, the feds have their own. The feds have their own. They have the VA hospitals, the regional offices. Okay. But they do fund programs that do trickle down into the nonprofits, like the Fox Grant, for mental health and for other unique
But what about
services.
When we get, where is this city? Is the city money coming from the city, or is it? That's what I'm trying to get.
No, it comes from the city.
It's coming from the city of New York.
From the city. So from the city.
I just need you to follow me where I'm going with this. So, because of the migrant crisis, we're all getting cut 15%, right?
That in the economy, you're cutting.
Getting 15% cut, right?
Yeah.
And this is why it's important, in my opinion, that veterans identify themselves as such. I'm really pushing to see us on the U.S. Census say, yes, we're identified as a veteran because we should be identified as a group of people. Where I'm going with this is, if we were a contained group of people, we can identify all 200,000 in the city of New York, right? What is there from stopping us from filing a class action lawsuit that these cuts infringe on our 14th Amendment right? We have a due process. And that cut is cutting into my due process. I know you're not a lawyer, but from a legal standpoint of view, does that make sense to you?
It does make sense. I mean, look, on certain levels, I could even say this is something that nonprofits who are working with everything from domestic violence to food to child care do the same thing. Okay. The question becomes, though, is what is the city doing to address other than saying, okay, we're cutting. I think what really gets to me is, like, we go through this dance every year with the state. The state starts the budget and they allocate hundreds of millions of dollars into the city. The city has its own budget. It knows what the state is giving it. It funds the programs. So when you're cutting into these monies, what are you doing with the money?
Where's it going?
Where is it going? And that I think is one of the things that we're having.
So we need an oversight. We need an oversight committee.
So for instance, unfortunately, again, with the Veterans Agency, it's low-hanging fruit,
right.
so to speak. Mm-hmm. So the city allocates X amount of dollars to that agency.
Okay.
Now, the agency, most of it, a majority of it, I should say, goes to paying the personnel in there. Then there's monies for like programs, but what programs can they do? Now, they do get some money from the state as a county, but again, no one really knows where this money is going. And then, because again, at one level, they could say, well, we're trying to do outreach where we're paying for, like, let's say, social media ads. But then when you get to them to testify, they're sitting there saying, well, we were paying for iHeartRadio and we had to cut that. And so it's a confusing, like, where is this money actually being spent?
It's almost like a hamster wheel.
It's almost like three-card Monte.
Right.
If I had to look at it like that, like I'm looking and you're and okay, well, where is it? And I'm trying to figure out, is it here? Is it there? That is one of the bigger challenges when we talk about particularly the Veterans Agency. Right.
And it's crazy. The only time we think about veterans, again, is the two times we spoke about. But, in my humblest opinion, there is a real effort to exclude veterans from this American process. Mm-hmm. And you could see it clearly in terms of how people are appointed. How many appointed positions have we seen where, oh, this guy served or this guy served? We don't have that. It's almost like we're frowned on for doing what we and that's almost like that's something that's unspoken. It's like an unspoken language.
And I'll give you even one better. There is a sense where you look at the last 4 or 5 commissioners, they've all been officers. Yet there are enlisted people who are enlisted people in the service that work in the city or that are advocating that could easily be the commissioner as well.
I agree. In fact, it makes more sense because most of the people that are being serviced aren't officers.
That's right. They're enlisted.
You probably count them on one hand.
They're enlisted, correct?
Maybe on one finger.
Majority,
you know what I mean?
The majority are enlisted.
And an enlisted can identify better. I absolutely agree. An enlisted could identify with an enlisted much better than an officer.
Yeah, and that's not to take anything away from them, but they have such a different mindset.
Right.
And in a lot of cases, it's kind of like, it's almost like the higher ranking you go as an officer, you are leaving it to others to do that job, and that's kind of what we're seeing.
Think lines get blurred because Correct. It becomes like an officer superior to an enlisted, and it's almost like, okay, you work for me, and that's kind of been my issue with a lot of these congressmen, whereas they when they're running, they promise you the sun, moon, and the stars, and then when they get in office, they kind of flip-flop and don't even acknowledge the veteran.
You really have to govern.
Right. And then turn around and make you feel as if you work for them. No, you work for me. Yeah. I have no problem telling anyone that, that's... The thing is, when you look at... I'm going to go on the record and say, we have bad government right now. From a federal...
I would say we have some bad actors in government right now.
We have... I want to say we got bad government.
Okay. Fair enough.
On a federal level, and it's not to say that everyone is, but they say one spoiled apple don't ruin the whole bunch.
Ruin the whole bunch.
That's cap.
Yeah.
Because if you don't take that apple out, it's going to infect the rest of them. It's going to one spoiled apple can ruin the whole barrel or the whole bunch. So on a federal level, you have it. On a state level, you have it, and on a city level, you have just poor government or poor representation of government, but I don't blame them. I blame us. Because when you're looking at bad government, you're looking at bad people that put them in there, and I think we need to become educated. And as a veteran, I'm willing to step up and reach out to some of my friends that do outreach in terms of educating people on how to vote and what to vote for. And we need to just stop this, I'm voting for the first of anything.
Yeah.
and start voting for the person that's qualified to do the job. I'm beyond identity politics. I'm beyond the first black man being this or the first gay woman being that. We got to get past that and say we need good representation, because these are, if we've ever been in, these are the most trying times I've ever seen in my life.
Yeah. And I think what makes it frustrating, for me on a veterans level is that, we don't really hear much for veterans. Every year when the city budget comes around, it's a struggle, it's a fight. But yet we get to like Veterans Day, and this past week, we start hearing from all the city council elected officials, like the majority of them, like my mother served, my mother and father served, my niece, my nephew, and it's like, wow, that's great. But what are they informing you? Because we don't get to that, my frustration with like looking at some of the things that are going on in the council, particularly when it comes to veteran funding, is, we're fighting to at least hold the line. We're not even getting any additional. And I get it. We don't have an advocacy arm or a lobbyist, that's somebody that's always in the council's ear. But if you respect us the way you say you do,
we shouldn't need it.
If you're there at the Veterans Day parade and you're there at veterans events, when it comes budget time, somebody should be like saying, hey, let's make sure these groups that are doing the work in the community are properly funded. Mm-hmm. And we're not seeing that.
Well, I totally agree. We should have that would be interesting, but we should have a veteran advocacy, a city, New York City and state veteran advocacy, because we don't advocate for anything on a veteran for veterans.
Well, the disconnect there is, so on the federal level, we have all these veteran service organizations. Mm-hmm. And, with them, they have to be nonpartisan, not Republican, not Democrat. They're just representing the veterans. Right. So there is this belief when you see the commercials for DAV or Wounded Warriors Project or the American Legion, that these groups are representing all of us, that everybody's a member, and it's not true. A lot of us are not members.
It's painfully not true.
We might be a member to one group, but not others. And so there is this belief on some level with the public that veterans are being taken care of. They come out, oh, thank you for your service. And, oh, yeah, they're being taken care of. Yeah, the funding is there. They've got the VA. They've got, and that's not necessarily, that's not necessarily true. And there are veterans who fall through the cracks. There are veterans who need services. New York City, I always like to say this, and anybody that watches this will know this is true. The VA is the second largest federal agency.
Next to Social Security.
And the DOD.
And the DOD, that's right.
Second biggest. Mm-hmm. New York City is one of the largest bureaucracies. Everyone knows that if you're trying to get a service, whether it's SNAP benefits, food stamps, or anything, it doesn't happen overnight. It takes time. There is a process. And so between those two entities, for a veteran transitioning, or even a veteran looking for services, a veteran who can't make the rent, a veteran who can't, this becomes a mountain to climb.
Right.
And by the time people like you and I see them, or they show up at a non-for-profit, they're already in crisis mode.
Yeah, they're damaged.
They're in crisis mode. They're already
and you
about to be out.
You gotta really kind of meet them where they're at.
Correct.
And get them out of the crisis before you can even attack the problem.
And therein lies exactly what you said. The city agency can't do that. Mm-hmm. They just don't have the personnel to do it.
So what do? They rely on the service providers?
They rely a lot on the service providers, and then what they do is they will shift people from, like, let's say, a councilman's office for a resource day, or they'll shift them to some place and make it. It's almost like playing checkers, chess, and but again, because the bureaucracy is so big, even if I went to that person at, let's say, that councilman's office, it doesn't mean I'm going to get that service like that. Right. It's not going to happen. It takes time, regardless, no matter what it is. Right. And by that time, what we're seeing happen in the veteran space, particularly within the last year or two, is A lot of people are no longer dealing with the Department of Veteran Services, with the agency, even though they're out there and they're telling you that, reach out to us. You're seeing a lot of networking now. Like, I
That's the
need housing.
distrust.
Yes. And that part of it is because a lot of veterans now believe we have a shared experience. You know somebody, you've been in the space longer, you know somebody, do you know anybody that can help me get, food? Well, yeah, I do. Not going to the agency that, oh yeah, we'll get it to you. Fill out this form online, and then we're waiting and somebody will get back to you. You're looking for it much faster now.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Makes a wow. It's interesting.
Yeah.
So food disparities. Have you seen the prices of food lately?
Oh yeah. Woo.
Like it's amazing. It's really weird. The fresher the food, the more expensive it costs.
Correct. Yeah.
I'm like, no. Peaches are $3.99 a pound. Are you kidding me? Like, is there a shortage of trees? Or like, I don't know. I don't know what's going on. But we have to figure out.
Well, this is all supply chains, and then a lot of these companies that were doing that work prior to the pandemic have been slow to pick up on
Notwithstanding, when you're in the black and brown communities, they take advantage by gouging the prices, and there's no watchdog to go after them for, gouging prices.
I mean, well, look, one of the big things in the city, all the city agencies that is constantly being said is they do not have enough people to fill those agencies. And because of the budget crisis we're in, the mayor has a hiring freeze going on right now. So they're only hiring those that they most desperately need. But yeah, there's not enough people enough people to go into the bodegas or in the places and spaces to say, hey, you're gouging. Like, what is this?
Then we don't even have enough people on the federal government to actually do the same. Because at some point you can always make an argument that, you have state and federal separation, but there's something that brings them together too. And I think, I don't know, I'm not sure where, but I'm sure that there's some kind of law that will say food gouging prices is a federal offense.
Yeah, and
we can bring these guys in, but we don't even have it on a federal level.
And you'll see, like, when times like that happen, particularly if we have a hurricane or something that happens, you'll see the state attorney general, warn about, like, do not price gouge. If you price gouge and we find out, you will be fined. We'll shut your business down. So, I mean, they do put it out there, but it doesn't mean it still doesn't happen.
There's no teeth. But that's why that goes back to me not being a fan of new laws, because you can't enforce the old ones. You know what I mean? The old ones could be protect us too if it was just enforced.
Yeah, I think on some level I agree with you. On others, I'm like, look, if there is a law that is worthy of being at least discussed and perhaps being moved forward, but if you're not meeting with the community to find out what the needs are or what can be done better, then you're taking a shot in the dark. So, and for me, I always look at it as, okay, we're talking about, like, services that you have for veterans and data numbers. What does that look like a year from now? Like, when we start to say, okay, show us some of this data.
Right.
That's been one of the biggest problems, because we'll get the data. So I'll give you an example.
So you think the data is faulty?
I think the data is skewed. Yeah, I do. And I'm going to give you a perfect example. There was another network on Friday, right before Veterans Day, that had the commissioner on its morning show. Mm-hmm. And they started talking about this 2021 survey that his agency, the Veterans Agency, did. Right. Now, if 2021, we were in the pandemic. But so they're giving us all these breakdowns on the TV screen of, like, 55% said housing and 20% said this. But the data is skewed, because at the very beginning of this conversation, how many veterans did we say are here in New York City?
Roughly 200,000.
Yeah. What if I told you roughly 3,000 people took that survey?
Yeah.
And that survey ran from March until October.
It is skewed.
The numbers are skewed. Yeah. And what you come to find out when you start digging into it, like somebody like myself would dig into these numbers, is the numbers changed or things were absent depending on what age bracket you were as a veteran.
Right.
So, for instance, the one they showed on TV showed nothing about legal services. But legal services is
there,
absolutely needed and was there,
right,
depending on the age bracket. So, I look at it and I'm like, you're not really telling the true picture. I mean, we all agree housing is number one.
Probably number one.
Number one. I think we'd all agree with that. Everything after that, it was interpretive on knowing. But if I'm sitting at home as Joe Q Public and I'm watching that and I'm like, wow, it's this. I'm thinking, oh, they've got this in hand. They know what's going on. Meanwhile, they're not telling you, yeah, well, only 3,000 people took this survey. Who's this really helping? How is this really informing?
So how does it, right? It doesn't necessarily reflect the other 197,000.
Correct, pretty much.
So, yeah, you're looking at a one-sided story.
Yeah, I mean, you're looking at a skewed story that's not really showing the true picture of what, and this is why my biggest fear when I'm talking to council members or at City Hall is the data numbers. There's no context to the data numbers that you're showing.
Speaking of the council members in City Hall, right? And I've seen this. They kind of talk with two tongue. They got a forked tongue. Like they'll make it in one breath. They'll be like, "This is unacceptable," and then when you get in these hearings, they're like, "Yeah, everything's great for veterans." Like, what is that, dude?
Well, my fear is, there needs to be more accountability over the city agency. So I'll give you an example. So in July, the commissioner went to Syracuse for this veterans forum, and he talked about Mission Vet Check. Now, for those of you who don't know, Mission Vet Check was this program where people from like New York Cares and others would call the veterans, any numbers that they had, do a wellness check on them. Because remember, this was during the pandemic. We were all inside. We were all locked in and away from community. It was a good program. So he's talking about it, but yet those of us that follow these things knew that it seemed like Mission Vet Check had been suspended. We were out of the pandemic. Like, it's still going on. When you looked at the agency's webpage, it said it had been suspended. We're at this mental health hearing, and the commissioner is talking about Mission Vet Check, and we got this program. I turned around when I got up to testify, and I showed them the phone with the picture saying, look, it's saying it's suspended. Then we fast forward a week later, the mayor puts out his mayor's management report. And the mayor's management report actually says Mission Vet Check was suspended in July 2022.
Oh, wow.
Due to the end of the end of the pandemic. But then because it's always about the gotcha moments and, okay, this is really what happened. 2 weeks later, Mission Vet Check is back up and running again. And if you need a phone call, call us. And it's like, what are we doing here? Is this real or is this
I don't know what's real and what's Memorex because I never knew are we out of the pandemic?
I don't think we're ever going to get out of it.
That's my point. We defeated COVID, right? There's no more COVID, right? So it doesn't make sense.
My thing is like, and I say this to the council members, and I say this: if you're not going to really oversight this agency, then there has to be some transparency and communication from the agency, and that just isn't what we're getting right now.
And has it always been that way?
I would say during de Blasio's first term, it was much more transparent, much more. I think because and I'm going to say that this was during the previous commissioner, not the one that was before this current one, but the one before him, her.
Okay.
Was so, and this was a point in time where we were getting laws and bills done, creating the Veterans Treatment Court, getting the agency, getting the Veterans Advisory Board, moving.
I'm glad you mentioned Veteran Court. Why is it some boroughs have it and others don't?
No, all 5 boroughs have it.
They do?
They do. The problem has been getting veteran mentors to come to the courts to be mentors to those veterans that are going through the system. And again, I'm going to bring it back to what we were talking about before. So when they asked well, what would make you come to, be a mentor in the courts?
Hmm.
A lot of them would like, well, if I could get a Metro card to come and go, right? Because the veteran mentor is
So you
paying
mean
everything out of pocket.
you mean the MTA doesn't even have Metro cards for that?
But not only that, it's the courts that are not paying for it either. They're not
Right. They got discretionary
the
funds.
DA,
Yeah.
the courts, they're not.
Oh wow.
So you have you have veterans that would like to be mentors, but again, with the way the economy is, the way things are, a lot of them are like, well, look, I love what I'm doing, and they'll do it out of pocket. But there are some who are like, well, if you could at least help me
Get a
by
Metro
giving
card.
me a Metro card so I can come to the court, be with the veteran I'm mentoring, and get home. The program you might get even more mentors.
You taught me a lot this show because I never knew that you could do that. So I may even try to volunteer my time.
Yeah, I mean
with the Bronx
every borough
District.
has. I mean, look, the judges are most of them. A lot of them are. I think 4 out of the 5 are veterans themselves.
Okay.
So I mean, they understand the veteran condition.
And you touched on something that I it's very profound, and I'm glad you did. Like when you think of veteran, you think we're all messed up, we all jacked up.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I've had a jacked up moment,
Sure.
but like I could point to people that are homeless, but I could really point to a lot of success stories that are
Absolutely,
veteran. So we got to be able to celebrate us, and the ones and the ones that are having trouble, we got to get them to the side where they going to be celebrated as well.
Correct.
That should be every veteran's mission, whether you get paid for it or not.
Yeah.
That's what I do when I'm not at work,
Yeah.
and when I am at
And
work.
I think what a lot of people, and probably if you're not around or not dealing with veterans, doesn't realize that the city has actually acknowledges 2 sets of veterans. Veterans who actually meet the federal definition of being a veteran, those
Right.
of us that served honorably or generally.
Right.
Then there's those who have got, for whatever reason, bad conduct discharges, or their service just didn't work out, and they are not eligible for federal benefits. That's where the city's definition covers them as well. So on the city level, they're considered veterans, but they need different kind of services
Right.
because they are not eligible for the federal.
So
benefits.
they're qualified for city benefits, but not on the federal.
Not on the federal level, correct. And so, again, everybody thinks a veteran is a veteran is a veteran.
Right.
And again, a lot of it comes down to, you served. You took the time out, you went in, and whatever happened, but you served.
Right.
You can't deny the fact that you went into service.
And you wear a uniform. That's right.
But then you come back to New York. And this is why, on some level, when you look at what happened during the pandemic, because we've been talking about that, is we've seen a drain of veterans. This was slowly starting to happen through the entire Northeast, but it really accelerated during the pandemic because older veterans passed away from COVID, right? They were the most vulnerable. Veterans who were living in like the veterans' homes, right? And we all heard stories about what happened in certain veteran homes or homes, senior living in other states. And then there were those veterans who, with their family members, were like, "Look, we got to go. We're going to go to where you can get better veteran services.
Right.
We're shifting demographics." So we've seen a drain here in New York and in the entire Northeast of veterans. And that's why, on some level, one of the problems we have, and again, goes back to what you brought up in the beginning, is we don't have a real accurate census of how many veterans are actually in New York. This is why, if you were listening at the very beginning of the show, I said, well, we have somewhere between 160, 200,000. I don't even really know, because over the years, that number has consistently jumped and shifted.
We were not allowed to identify ourselves.
The city council passed a law to make active duty be considered veterans. So, now you're adding on Coast Guard and, Navy. They're all, anybody stationed here are considered veterans, even though they wouldn't consider themselves veterans. So we've kind of shifted these numbers, but we don't really have an accurate census or data point of what actual veteran numbers we have here.
I'm very solution orientated. like, what are some of the solutions to these problems? And like, one of the solutions that I think is we need to have a census nationally that says that we're at least able to identify ourselves as veterans.
Mm-hmm.
So we should be able to congregate and say we are a group of people, but they keep it, it's fragmented. We're fragmented.
Well,
So one of the things I like to see is us get on a federal level to say, hey, yeah, I served, I'm a veteran, by whatever legal definition, because if you didn't have boots on the ground in some cases, you're not allowed certain services as well. So, I mean.
So I would say, look, I believe, I've always believed, you know, until you show me otherwise, I believe that every mayor, every elected official wants to do right by the veterans.
Right.
And I get it that there's competing things. I just think that the lack of communication and the lack of transparency and the lack of honesty is what's really been hurting us. So, for example, I want to say about 6 months ago, the mayor had a veteran housing summit, which is great. I think that was phenomenal. I think the fact that we just
I was
talked
invited. I didn't go though.
but I mean, yeah. But I think it was great that we know from what we were just talking about, housing for everybody or for the majority of people is the top issue.
So what came out
particularly
of
for
it?
veterans. Exactly. What came out of it? No one knows. No one got told. No one saw. I mean, if you have a summit,
So we're doing show and tell.
you're having a summit for a purpose. But when you don't know what that purpose, you know, you come out of that and you're questioning, okay, so what's the plan, or what does the action look like, or, you know, what is it that the mayor is proposing? And you get nothing, then most veterans look at it as, oh, this looked like nothing more than a photo op. And, you know, like the mayor, like the president, everybody would take a photo with him. But when it comes time for election and voting, people remember those things. People remember those things because they're going to say, what have you done? Like one of the things right now happening, we're reaching the halfway mark in Mayor Adams' administration. And take away what's going on right now aside.
Right.
Yeah.
Woo, there's a push.
I look at somebody like myself, I look back to the past when he was candidate Brooklyn Borough President Eric Adams. He put out a whole platform as to what he was going to do for veterans, and part of it was mental health, part of it was some other things, and that's the stuff I want to look back at. What did Mayor Adams say, and what have we accomplished in the past 2 years? So I think that's an important to get a barometer of, okay, we're at the halfway point. So now, what is the plan that we're at the halfway point?
Right.
Because I personally, it's one thing for him to say, we've got services and the bombs bursting in air, and it could be for PTSD, and it could be bombs for this. It's great, but it's all talking points.
Right.
It's all optics, and around Veterans Day, you get a lot of optics. It's the other 363 days, because we'll add in Memorial Day, that I'm wondering, how are we helping those veterans and family members, particularly our senior veteran population?
Veterans Day, this is my biggest peeve. It's been just like Black History Month. It's been commercialized. You've taken away the essence of what it was supposed to have been. The biggest way to say thank you for your service is when you could point to someone that is actually continuing that service. Meaning, we haven't had a Joint Chief of Staff that was a veteran or a Black person since the late Colin Powell. That's criminal, dude.
And we finally got one now.
That's criminal.
Air Force.
In the Air Force?
Yeah.
Okay.
But I mean, look.
But you it's not enough. It's.
I look at it from the perspective of, look, if there is a business or a business that is offering something to thank you for your service, take it. You earned it.
Right.
You earned it.
Right.
But again, that doesn't transcend to like, okay, everybody gets the one day at Applebee's,
Right.
and then the next day they're food insecure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I think that's a big issue.
I'm thinking if we could I always say our issues are federal. They're a federal issue, but I mean, we live in a city.
Well, let me give you an example of how federal and city can work together. And that perfect example on the homeless front. So when President Obama came in, he made bringing down homelessness amongst veterans a priority in his administration.
Mm-hmm.
So what he started to do is he allocated federal dollars into the cities to create these task force, that combined federal, state, and local officials. That the priority became, look, we have to bring the numbers down. And for the most part, look, they weren't as successful in LA, but they were successful in New York City. And that's not to say homelessness
Why
doesn't
wasn't
exist.
they successful in there? I'm wondering why.
Well, New York City
Skid Row still look like Skid Row.
Yeah.
It has not changed.
Yeah, it
has not moved one iota.
Yeah.
Why?
Well, part and parcel, I mean, there was a number of reasons. Part and parcel, some of it was the weather. LA always has great weather. New York City, we go through the four seasons, and then it's winter, and
you ain't trying to be out.
No,
right.
Exactly. So that was part of it. The other part of it was that you had veterans in what I talked about before. Veterans in the Northeast were moving or passing away, whereas LA, Las Vegas, Arizona California, we're seeing a larger increase of veteran active duty getting out who are going into those areas. So that you started to see those numbers increase. The other thing too is the 5 boroughs, and we go back to the history of New York City. The 5 boroughs were incorporated back in like the 1800s. So that's how we have the 5 boroughs, New York City. Come to find out, like when I was in LA visiting, a lot of the counties don't have memorandum of understandings with each other. So like, you'd have an LA county doing one thing and another LA county doing another, and they weren't communicating each other.
They weren't on the same page.
They weren't on the same page. And so that's now starting to change. But like I said, when the federal dollars came in, New York City was smart about it, and this is leading towards Bloomberg. Say what you want, but he was an autocrat with the number crunching. And then going in through de Blasio.
Say what you want. If he was running tomorrow, I might vote for him.
Well, they made sure that the money was being funded into the programs. They started documenting veterans in a database. They like, hey, okay, you've checked in with us here, and they started following them. Like, okay, you're in Borden Avenue, but now you're in supportive housing. They started creating more supportive housing. They started. So again, our numbers went down. That's not to say, and let me be clear here, we have seen an uptick of homeless veterans in New York City. And there's always going to be those that are on the street or in a car or not identifying that we just don't know about.
Would it help and we could do this if we choose to, if we just gave I know there's a downside to what I'm getting ready to say. I just don't know what it is. Maybe you could shed light. The second that the veteran has been discharged, whether he or she needs it or not, shouldn't they have a HUD Voucher voucher?
I agree. I mean, that
would eliminate homelessness right off the rip.
Well, I think it would make things a lot better for them transitioning. I mean, you get veterans you get active duty members when their time is up and they're short timers. They just want to get out. They're looking to get out, for whatever reason, whether they just want to get on with life or whether they're starting to have a bad experience or they didn't get the next command that they wanted, or they didn't get promoted. There's a plethora of reasons why. And so when they go through, the federal government does have transition assistance. They have these classes. But, it's come to be seen, most veterans they're there, but they're not really there.
They're just trying to get out.
They're just trying to get out. They've got other things, particularly if they have a family. Where are we moving to next? Where are we going? Where's the family? We got to go back here. And when you get to veterans in New York, again, maybe I knew some that left because they had problems with their family members, went away and then had to get out. And where do you think they went back to? So you unresolved all these issues on the front end, and now you got to come back to 4, 6, 12 years later on the back end. And that's been a big problem. So I actually agree with you. If there was a federal law that was like, look, but I think that what the federal government has as its rules are so difficult to navigate. you have to be homeless for a certain amount of time.
Right.
Give me-
That part, I'm like,
I mean,
dude.
look, perfect example. This is where the city and federal don't mix up. The mayor, because of the homeless crisis and the migrant crisis, he announced we're going to waive the 90-day or the time that you had to stay in a shelter before you can be eligible to get
So you could have did that
or
off
whatever.
You could have did that from the gate.
He did, but it doesn't work for veterans
No.
because veterans are on the federal level with the federal. So you can't get a HUD-VASH voucher unless you wait
still
the
play
days.
those 90 days.
Unless you
So
wait
now
the 90 days.
So it has to be changed on a federal level.
It would have to be changed on, and this was.
And he's not, and the
the mayor
city's
doesn't
not.
have any control of that.
But he could communicate today.
He could.
He could say that.
He could, but I mean,
But then this is why. But then don't come show up telling me about stars and spangles and wrap yourself in a flag if you're not gonna really wrap yourself in a flag. You're being hypocritical.
Well, this goes to another issue about what I said about communication and transparency. So we know in the community that the commissioner, with some of his team, has been traveling down to Washington, D.C. We have no idea why. So we have no idea why, but the mayor has a federal office of the mayor's office of federal legislative affairs. So who is doing what? Who's working on the fact of, like what we're talking about now, to try to change some of these rules or waive the vouchers, and we're just not seeing that.
Dude, all I know is Borden Avenue is toxic and they need to implode it.
Well,
And maybe make better. Maybe they need to make a city federal veteran housing there.
So let me be transparent here about this. I am the advisory chair for Borden Avenue.
I know.
Borden Avenue has gotten better.
I
have to say that it has gotten better. There used to be open bays for those veterans who were city veterans, considered city veterans, didn't have the federal. The city has now given everyone a cubicle in there.
They have?
Yes, they have.
Okay.
And
because I was hearing horror stories.
No, it's gotten better. It has gotten better. What eventually, to my mind, is going to happen is, so what do we see in black and brown neighborhoods? Gentrification. And a lot of gentrification is starting to take place in Long Island City. And so what you're seeing is Borden Avenue used to be like warehouses, and they didn't even have a light.
Right.
People would. Now you're starting to see the buildings are being refurbished. It started
illuminating everything.
They put lights. Mm-hmm. They're building a huge mixed use building next to Borden Avenue. So at some point, because Borden Avenue is old, the structure of the building is going back. I think the Vietnam veterans helped create that back in the 80s when Koch was the mayor.
Mm-hmm.
So there's going to have to be a conversation at some point in time. I don't know when, and I wish it was sooner rather than later, about how long can Borden Avenue stay where it's Borden Avenue, and how long before that building doesn't need to be tore down and create a new building, a mixed-use building with supportive housing building, a building where they can get training in, something
That's what I would like to see.
Something where you would, no, I agree with you. I think that would be phenomenal. And that's not to say that the current nonprofit running it doesn't work with like
Ready, Willing, and Able was one of the best. When they were taking on veterans, people would ask me, "Oh, I want to go to Ready, Willing, and Able." What the city needs to follow, whatever they're doing, we need to implement that. Yeah. So, because we're running out of time, but I definitely got to bring you back. Maybe we need to actually create a show outside of this, just for veteran issues, because we went a whole hour. But
wow, that was quick.
In closing, right, I want to ask you, is one of the solutions is to create more service providers in New York City? Because obviously you said that there's a distrust with the city, but do you think that people would lean towards a service provider? Maybe some of these VFWs or the NAB vets or the American Legions could actually become service providers.
I would agree with you. I think the problem is going back to the city government is if you're not going to fund it, then you have a problem with it. So, for example, the city council has a veterans initiative, and it's roughly almost $3 million. But you have X amount of nonprofits, service providers in there, but you can't start cutting everybody's funding by X amount and then adding more service providers in. Because now you're stretching the money,
Right.
and then the service providers who need that money to do the services that they've been providing are now sitting there, well, I can't do this.
Some of these programs are federal, though.
Some of them are funded by federal. It's almost like dual funding. Some of them, not all of them.
Right.
No.
Okay. Well, listen, Joe.
Thank you for having me back.
Thank you, man. Like this was just so enlightening and went so quick. Again, happy Veterans Day to you. You definitely represented the finest branch of the armed forces, which is the United States Navy. Anchors away. This is your boy Kevin C. Megan, Kop Or No Kop. Check for us. We're on Roku. We're on LG Smart, Sony. Most of your smart TVs, Androids, and all those neat devices. And we're gonna bring Joe back, and when these credits start rolling, we're gonna probably chop it up and figure out how we could just do something where we can bring veteran issues here more often and come up with solution based to actual problems. Until next time, Kevin C. Megan, Kop Or No Kop. You have a great week. Thank you.
What can be the vision of life without knowledge, attitude, and practices? Our host, Kevin Charles Meggett, has brought you the Kop Or No Kop to enlighten your knowledge about politics, city government, state government, federal government, veteran, housing, jobs, crime, healthcare, local issues, and all-American homeless issues through the fruitful talks with honorable guests. To watch Kop Or No Kop, keep your eyes only on Millennium News 24.